Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy, and I'm super excited to bring you our next Draw Together session, where it's not just me drawing, but it's me and a guest. And I'm really excited because our guest today will be none other than Natalie Nixon, who's dialing in from Philadelphia. Natalie, can you hear me okay?
I can. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Natalie. How are you this morning?
Awesome. How are you doing?
I am good, and I'm so glad that after we did get to meet, oh gosh, a year plus ago, 2 years ago now, Natalie and I first met in Philadelphia at the Barnes Collection. Natalie, can you just tell us a little tiny bit for people who don't know about the Barnes Collection? What is the Barnes Collection in Philadelphia?
The Barnes Collection is a collection of pristine and amazing art by Mr. Barnes. I'm forgetting his first name, unfortunately, and it was actually a pretty contested event when the collection moved from a suburb of Philadelphia called the Main Line, where his home and his estate was, to the center of Philadelphia proper. But it's since become just an amazing gathering point and an exhibition space for incredible art.
Well, and wasn't he known in particular, he and his family, for impressionists, right? Like one of the world's largest impressionist collections that basically no one had ever seen, because he essentially kept it quiet, something like that, right?
Exactly. He was a really interesting man, and actually one of the reasons why it was so contested is that he gifted his estate to the historically black college, Lincoln University, of which Thurgood Marshall was a graduate.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so part of the issue was he was around accessibility, and those who wanted the collection to go into the center of Philadelphia said it would actually become more accessible. But there's actually two really cool documentaries about the whole thing. But yeah, his when you go there, it's really overwhelming, because it will be a Rembrandt next to a Picasso next to a Miro, and it's just a lot, but it's incredible.
Wow. I remember seeing you there, and it was incredible, because as someone with some painting in my education, an opportunity to see a lot of these paintings, many of which were paintings that people didn't even know existed. They had rarely been photographed or made public. But Natalie, that is not what we're here to talk about, although visual thinking certainly falls in. So Natalie, among many other things which we will talk about, is the author, editor of a fabulous book called Strategic Design Thinking, which, as the title would indicate, is truly the best book out there about what is design thinking. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Natalie, I thought it was really interesting when I was looking through some of your online materials that I found that you had something called figure eight thinking. What is figure eight thinking?
Figure eight thinking is my design strategy practice. And I decided to call my business that because I work at the intersection of creativity and strategy. So that shape kind of speaks to intersection, but also I am a very kinesthetic learner. I have a background in dance, and now the research shows that when we learn through movement, which the design studio model actually allows us to do a lot more of, there's a different range of brain synapses that are triggered. Mm-hmm. And I just also like the iterative process that the figure eight motion signifies. So that's the story behind the name.
Well, I loved it. And as I was looking at the logo today, and I actually had to redraw it, it looked to me a bit like stitching in cloth. And I recognize also that you have a background in fashion. Is there a connection there, or am I making something up?
No, absolutely. I work with amazing web designers. It's a husband-wife team, Jen and Andrew, forgetting their last name, but their business is called Pixel Parlor here in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And they really got me because they really listened to me. And so when they were building out my brand identity, they really captured all that. Yeah, but my mother was actually a weaver. Women in my family are really gifted in the fiber arts, and I learned to sew with my sister when I was really young. It was always kind of functional art. And then I got into fashion really out of need in my 20s. I started a small hat design business, which is a whole other story. But yeah.
Oh, that is a whole other story. Wow. So, but keep going. Keep going. This is good. So a hat design business. Yeah. This is your story. Please keep going.
My hat design business was called Nat's Hats.
Yes.
And I started it because I was living in New York, and I was in my 20s, just out of college, not making a lot of money at all. Would dreamily window shop in all the boutiques in Manhattan, and I started sewing all my clothing because I knew how. I couldn't afford to buy all the pretty frocks. And I sewed my winter coat. I sewed outfits for work. I sewed hats and such. And my friend said, Nat, you could sell this stuff. And I was like, no, I can't. I just do this because I don't have the money to buy the real stuff. I would say to them. And they said, no, you could sell this. And so I jokingly say I inherited my father's cajones. And one day I walked into a boutique where I like to window shop, introduced myself as a hat designer because I had been kind of daydreaming if I should do this. I think I would do hats because they're fun, low cost of materials. And I introduced myself as a hat designer, asked to speak to the manager, the owner. She said, I'm her. I said, great. I said, I'd love to talk to you about selling some of my work here, my hats. She said, great, let's make an appointment. And a week later, I went home. I busily sewed about 20 hats. I didn't know the difference between inventory and samples at the time. And and she bought everything out wholesale. It wasn't even consignment basis. And I learned a lot from her and many others who I was selling my hats in boutiques in Manhattan and Brooklyn and then later in Philly. But this was in the early 90s before the internet, before AOL You've Got Mail, before Pinterest and Instagram and such. So who knows where it might have gone had I had those platforms. But it was
do
really
continue. So Natalie, I'm going to keep rolling on this. So do continue, and please tell us, how did that then lead to your book and your work around strategic design thinking? So there's two questions embedded in here. Number one, make the transition from Nat's hats to strategic design thinking, and along the way, tell us just a little bit about the book. What should we really know about it?
Oh, I guess the link is that I have a really loopy background.
Okay.
The link is that I do have a habit of following my heart and paying attention to my intuition. And so the journey from Nat's hats kind of gave me the courage and kind of a baseline that I could make something real from a thought into actual, revenue bearing thingamajig. And
Yeah.
after Nat's hats, in between that and becoming a professor, I worked in global fashion sourcing. I was a middle school, high school teacher for a chapter of my life. I warned you, it's a loopy background.
I like the loopy part. I've been trying to draw a little as we're going too. Yeah, a little bit of
Yeah,
loopy. Heart plus
yeah,
money plus loopy plus hats.
yes. And I started out as a professor in the fashion management program at what is now Jefferson University, and was getting coached by my mentors to earn a PhD. They said, you're a good professor, give you more options. I said, no, I don't know that I need to spend a lot of years proving how smart I am in a little bitty area. And through happenstance, a friend of mine, a guy named Craig DeLarge, he forwarded me information about this field called design management, literally a week before I was headed to London for a completely different reason. I quickly Googled, by now there was Google, so I quickly Googled what design management is. It's huge in Europe and the UK. I contacted heads of departments over in London and Leeds and Manchester. It turned out that doing a PhD while working full-time was a lot more feasible, although hard, but feasible than the USA model. So I earned a PhD in design management. My whole world was it was a mind-blowing experience and mind-expanding experience. And I just loved what I was studying. And I was working full-time while I was earning my PhD in 4 years. And I started whispering in the ear of any leader at the university who had listened to me. I said, we've got to do something in this space. And as what often happens to the squeaky wheel, they said, okay, great, you do it. So
go do it.
And yeah, so I started something called the Strategic Design MBA program. I used to review a lot of fashion textbooks for Fairchild publishers, and one of the chief editors was very encouraging through my whole journey of earning my PhD in design management. And she said, when you finish your PhD, we'd love for you to do a book because we need more text in that space. So that's how strategic design thinking came about. And I really wanted it to be very hybrid in nature. The moniker I had developed for the Strategic Design MBA program was the MBA for Hybrid Thinkers. And
yes. I'm going to stop you right there, because that is actually one of the quotes that I'm going to ask you, or we may end up drawing. So
Yeah.
Natalie, because there's so much we want to share, I want to get us drawing too. So keep all those
Okay.
thoughts in mind, and we are going to shift over. If you don't mind, let's go ahead and do our draw together. So basically the idea, because we're going to draw out this hybrid mind, that's one of the questions. And if you don't pick it, that's the one I'm going to pick for you, because I want to know what that, and I want us to draw what that means. We'll select a topic. I've drawn a number of topics from strategic design thinking, as well as some of your videos and some of your quotes on your website. We're going to draw it together. You as the guest, you will start 5 lines or so, and then turn it over to me, with the idea being that we'll talk and we'll draw at the same time. So Natalie, are you ready for draw together?
I am ready.
Okay, good. I am going to click over now to our Ziteboard, shared whiteboard. So come here, Ziteboard. All right, and let's do a very, very quick little test drawing. Natalie, just draw any little thing if you would. I want to make sure that we're on the same shared whiteboard. Just a little, there we go, perfect. The triangle, the delta of change. Okay, fabulous. So now, knowing that we can draw together, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint one more time, and I'm going to go to the famous set of doors. And I'm going to ask you to pick one of these doors behind which are hiding your quotes. Which door would you like to select?
I'm going to start with door number 3.
Door number 3. Okay, 1, 2. Oops, see, I
Ooh.
skipped past it. Let me get back. There's door number 3. Okay. Oh, here we go. This is your quote, so can you please read it for us?
The focus of strategic design thinking is process rather than solution.
All right. Process rather than solution as the focus of design thinking. So Natalie, your whiteboard to start.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and draw that.
So what I mean by that is processes are loopy and convoluted. And this is actually kind of an adaptation. The squiggly line is an adaptation by a gentleman, I'm forgetting his name, but I'm sure someone on the call knows his name, but it's from Central Office, I think is the company, and it's now part of the Creative Commons. But I love it because this is the process that is emblematic of any type of attempt to get better employee engagement or better marketing strategy or research, right? Solution-based thinking is, dare I say, keeps it in the box and is really afraid of ambiguity. So strategic design thinking tends to err on the side of process. And it's a very different way of learning. It's a very different, I mean, in this space, we are obsessed with did we even ask the right question before we go running down this rabbit hole of assumptions? So this is the place where we find much joy.
Oh, fabulous. So I'm going to add a little bit more. So I thought it was interesting that we also started out with this triangle which we all know represents change. So I'm actually going to take your triangle and I'm going to move it over here in the middle. And I'm going to say, just for the purposes of clarity, that we've seen a kind of a split down the middle of our triangle. And on the one side, we have what we're calling the solution. So yes, the box. Here it is. This is what it looks like. You can hold it in your hand. I can charge you money for it, or I can whatever. And on the other side, we've got the convoluted, not the convoluted, but the loopy process. So given that, I've drawn a little bit too now. Can you add a little bit more thinking into how does strategic design thinking do that? How does it stay on the process side as opposed to the box side?
Well, it does that by being comfortable with both what's called divergent and convergent thinking. So you get really comfortable with all the ideas that come with brainstorming and ideation, but you also realize that there does come a point where you've got to distill and get clarity and get practical and put a period at the end. So it's not that strategic design thinking is against a solution, but it understands that if we start with falling in love with our solution, that's problematic because solutions can be loaded with assumptions, especially if we're drawing from the same well. The other point that I should say that happens in the strategic design thinking space is that we are hyper-focused on the people who are buying our products and our services. And we believe if we start with the people first, that will drive efficiencies and productivity and great profit margins versus starting with profit margin goals and efficiency targets. And then we think about the people last. So starting with people, being in love with the process, are a lot of the characteristics of the strategic design thinking process.
So this is interesting, Natalie, because so I'm gonna echo a little bit what you said. I'm just gonna put some numbers here. I'm gonna go all linear on you for a moment. So I'm gonna say that one of the ways to think about strategic design thinking is you put the person first and the product and what's associated with the product second. And it's understanding the people that leads you to a better product, because having spent many, many years in various sides of the software development process, would this be parallel to say what often happens is an engineer, very smart person, an engineer over here, maybe a little propeller on their head, brilliant ideas, says, I have a great list of features of something that we're going to put into our new app, and we build it for the features, and then maybe somewhere along the way we go and we test it. And you're saying that perhaps design thinking might flip that a little bit?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what does that flip actually look like then?
So it looks like you start instead with the question of this great engineer would start with, well, how do we know we've even identified the right features? Maybe this is a right feature and that's a right feature, but this one not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would, this engineer would come over here and actually have a conversation.
Ah, what a novel idea, right?
With with the person who may or may not need an app. Who says that it has to be an app even?
Right. Yes. I love that. That's the old joke, you know, how many what is it? How many engineers does it take to put in a light bulb? And then the design thinker says, well, does it have to be a light bulb? Does it have to be an engineer? Yes. Perfect. And I like what you've done is you've also said that the strategic design person, strategic design thinker, also has a propeller on their hat.
Yes.
Perfect.
And that's the hybrid piece. It's like, should we erase a little bit? Do you want to go to another?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. I think we've milked this one pretty well. And
Yes.
I know that the other quotes that we have are related. So it is my hypothesis that if we do one more, we're going to end up in some familiar territory. So let's not erase anything. What I'm going to do, Natalie, is I'm going to scoot this up. So I'm going to move to the next blank Zeitboard for us. Okay. And now let's go back to the doors and ask you to pick another one.
All right. I'm in an odd number type of mood. I'm going to pick number 1.
Oh, number 1. Okay. Was that one I wanted you to pick? I think so.
Uh-oh.
I hope so. Yes. Yes. My favorite of all. Okay. What does this one say to us, Natalie?
Emergent leadership comes from happy accidents.
Let's draw out what that means. Emergent leadership, what is that? Happy accidents, what are those?
So a lot of times we think of leadership as kind of this more traditional org chart structure where leaders are at the top of the heap. And instead, emergent leadership assumes, or I'm going to change the color for a second, assumes that, emergent leadership says that actually leaders might be embedded more deeply in the organization, who are trying out new things because actually they're much closer to the product or to the service. And when you think about it, all change comes from like that crack in the beautiful, solid mountain. And this is really directly related to...
I'm going to draw that just as you do it. I'm just going to do it. Here's the beautiful mountain. I'm going to make a little snow-capped mountain. And you're saying that there's a lot that comes out of this crack in the side. Okay.
Yeah. It's very similar to people have heard of from chaos theory, the butterfly effect, right? Which is this idea that how might the flapping of a butterfly's wings in the Amazon jungle, this is going to be my really bad, this is Brazil, maybe?
Of course it's Brazil. Absolutely. I know. It is Brazil. Beautiful South America. Yes.
Right? How might that cause a tsunami in beautiful teardrop-shaped Sri Lanka in the middle of the Indian Ocean, right? But it's this idea, Sorry, these are supposed to be waves.
Totally got it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
And that's Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka. I know this because I lived there many
You
years
were there
ago.
when
But
you were in
anyway,
fashion, right?
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. But yeah, but this idea that it's actually these smaller shifts that can come out. So the happy accidents can come from nurses are amazing hackers. Teachers
Yeah.
are amazing hackers. Salespeople at the front who greet you at McDonald's are amazing hackers, and they're great hackers because they are constantly and they're great improvisers, right? So they constantly have to figure out in the moment how to respond to a customer, a client, a student's, a patient's request, and very possibly with tools that people at the top haven't thought about, haven't considered, because they're a bit more removed from the front line. So these folks are actually the best sources of data. And in my view, stories are data too. So stories that are coming from the customer, coming from the students, coming from the patients, we have to factor in. And so the happy accident is, oh, what do you know? Even though this didn't cost as much money to do, it's something that's totally scalable because it's so simple, and it actually is meeting a need that has nothing to do with what the head honchos might have thought and assumed was the actual problem.
And I remember from one of your talks that leaders, even at the top of the mountain, at the top of the pyramid, who understand the value of this emergent leadership, leaders that are emerging from down here sort of in the trenches, might explicitly use design thinking to design the culture of their organization to encourage that to happen. And I think you gave an example of Pixar, I think.
Yeah.
Can you draw out for us just really quickly what was the thinking there?
So when Pixar designed its building, which is now not so new, they realized there would be great opportunity to have things like the bathrooms and water fountains in places that would require people to walk. That bathrooms weren't necessarily at every floor, and it would cause a bit of stickiness. And so you'd have these happy accidents because people would have more water cooler moments, and they would pass people who they typically wouldn't pass if they were always sitting up on their second, third, fourth floor. So space can be a way we design those happy accidents. Google used to have something called 20% time, and a lot of companies are now doing variations of that. Google doesn't do it anymore, but they used to say, every fifth day or so, they gifted their employees to noodle and tinker and work on something that was of their own interest, and out of that, Gmail was born.
Oh, that's right. That is the story. Exactly. Yeah.
So you can redesign the way you use time. You can redesign space in order to have those sorts of happy accidents.
Two big messages from this quote, which is why I love it so much. I've got another favorite of yours, and we've got some questions coming in, but I might ask mine anyway, but we're going to see. Is thought number one, then, I'm going to get all linear on you again, just for the purposes of capture. Thought number one is this concept of emergent leadership is something that we want to recognize and encourage. And the second thing is that in order to enable this emergent leadership to happen, it makes a lot of sense to create an environment in which happy accidents are likely to happen, as counterintuitive as that might be. Would that be true?
Absolutely.
I love that. I really like that. Emergent leadership comes from happy accidents. Well, Natalie, we've done two of our drawings. Quick time check. We're nearing probably 5-10 minutes before we need to wrap this up. I've got I have a quote for you, Natalie. I want to do one more drawing. I'm going to actually move the screen one more time to a completely blank place, and I'm going to draw in another bracket. So do you see the bracket coming in? So I want to do one more drawing here. And it's quote number 5 from our PowerPoint. I'm just going to take over. I just really want you to do this one because it's going to bring in our next idea. So quote number 5 is this. Jazz increases your productivity. Okay, go off on a
Yes.
riff on this one, Natalie. Be jazzy
So,
now. What does that
yeah.
mean? Jazz
So,
improves your productivity. What and draw?
oh,
Yeah,
yeah, sorry. So, what I mean by that is that, so jazz musicians um, are, jazz operates in what's called a chaotic system. And the
chaotic.
chaotic,
Oh,
yes,
I've
so
never heard
chaotic
that.
system
That's cool.
is chaos
Plus,
and order. And it's a term that was coined by a guy named D. Hock. D was the founder of Visa, the credit card company,
mm-hmm,
Visa.
mm-hmm.
And so jazz is a complex system. And so chaos is not anarchy. Chaos is randomness.
Okay.
And order is not control. Order is structure. And so
Right.
jazz increases productivity because you're constantly doing this dance between order and randomness. And that requires you to know the rules. So it requires, and we were talking before we started the call about this new framework I've been playing around with around wonder and rigor, right? It requires you to know the rules. It requires you to understand structure and framework. And then it allows you to play. And I think we really underestimate the power of, this is supposed to be a saxophone.
Yeah, I get it.
And these are drums, maybe, perhaps. Um,
So, Natalie, it's the back and forth. I'm picking up on a theme here that resonates in my own mind. It's the back and forth of passing it from structure to chaos, back to structure. Reminds me, from my own Dan-centric point of view, of this thing that we're doing right now, which is sometimes words, which are very, very structured in the way that we must compose them, even if the ideas they represent are more conceptual. And the pictures that we draw to
yes.
complement those words, it's also to me a forcing mechanism between, our two kind of modes of thinking. Once again, our loosey loopy mode and our trying to get it all in line with a single arrow through it mode. And it's the bouncing back and forth that is the benefit, that is the ultimate benefit.
And we need both.
Yes.
And the challenge is in the way that we educate and the way that our organizations are designed, we tend to err on the side of structure and rules and order, which are important. But I think we underestimate how could I visualize play? Maybe I'll do play this way. I think we underestimate. This is a beach ball or
Yeah.
something. We underestimate the value of play because play, in my mind, really leads to experimentation. It requires experimentation. Play is a method of inquiry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And play is how we start out of exploring the world, of understanding where the boundaries are. And actually, I don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg. If it's play as we're evolving as little people, but or it's the boundaries that we then bump into. But this is always part of our environment constantly. But somehow and D. Hock understood this, that we try to create these human organizations that look full of structure and rules, and then there's kind of this slow death that happens for people inside of them. So to say that jazz increases productivity, jazz metaphorically, if you understand that jazz is a chaotic system that values chaos and play and randomness as well as structure and order, we get to being the most productive when we can bounce back between both.
This is so incredible. We're sadly, Natalie, we're going to have to sign off, and I don't even want to do that because I'm really enjoying this. Jerome, I think, has his microphone up, and Jerome has been following this. So Jerome joined us from Belgium, and Jerome has been a Napkin Academy associate for a long time, and Jerome is always full of excellent ideas. And Jerome wants to do a little riff with you on blues because he's got some pushback on jazz as it relates to the blues. Let me read exactly what Jerome has said. About this, I always explain to my coach that you can do sexy innovation with no constraints whatsoever, but blues is limited to some notes and sounds. Doing blues innovation is a way to take something simple, uh, like invoicing a customer, and innovating it in this boring context. We can't talk to Jerome, no microphone, but do you hear something in there that's interesting?
Yes. So do you want to
Yeah,
do
let
you
me.
want to
I
draw
want
in
to
this?
keep all this, so I'm going to make one more. I'm just going to scroll it one
Okay.
more time, and we're just going to do this in a minute or two. Just tell us a little bit about blues and how the structure of blues lends towards so much innovation.
So the foundation, back. The foundation of jazz, foundation of jazz. I'll kind of go back in a timeline. Are the blues?
Mm-hmm.
And before the blues, there was the spirituals,
Mm-hmm.
and so part of, and it's all embedded, and then out of this comes, rock and roll and R&B and rock and all this other stuff that's very, very much rooted in the American tradition. But the blues, the simplicity of the blues is the blues often the spirituals was coded language, as is the blues. So the blues said so much with so few words. So it's rich in metaphor, and similarly, I think from what I wish Jerome could chime in verbally, audibly, but what I hear you saying when you're talking about the example of the invoice, Jerome, is that there's a lot that we can do with a little, and where I want to kind of take that idea is that limited constraints are prime us for creativity.
Absolutely.
So right, so limitations in time can really prime us for creativity. So similarly, being okay with limited structures actually makes us more creative. So I can want to give an example too. When I was working on my PhD, I was working with the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, which is actually an incredibly improvisational organization, because they figured out how to have these fluid structures that allow their employees to delight guests and avoid what I call permission slip culture. Mm. So in order to do that, you can't suffocate people with rules. You have to have these kind of fluid structures that they can rebound out of. So that the idea of the simplicity of the blues and structure, you can find that in organization. That's another way of talking about this, which I totally agree with.
Wow, so this is incredible, because the little I know of I come from a bit of a musical family as well, and I remember young when I think my dad was talking about, hey Dan, all these blues, it's all the 12-bar blues, right? And if you listen to the songs you really like, the structure is there. So Napkin Academy Associates and Natalie, I want to thank you so much for having shared so much time with us. Natalie, thank you one more time for all of your fantastic ideas and drawing. And
thank you.
Well, such a pleasure. And thank you all, Napkin Academy Associates. This is Dan signing off from the Napkin